back to the Berg Podcast. Thanks for joining me today. With me today is Dan.
Hey, everybody.
And Ford.
Hey, how's it going?
And we spent a fair amount of time talking about wins. And we were talking recently about winning when it doesn't look like a win, right? Jobs that don't go as planned, but we figure out a way to make it all right. And that doesn't always mean that we killed it and, made the margins we were hoping for, but we made it out and we're intact and the client is reasonably happy and that their project is completed the way they wanted it to, et cetera. So, and that's a different type of success.
Yeah, winning by survival, right? I mean,
Right.
that's really what it boils down to. I mean, I think that in today's world, we can go on a diatribe, but with what we're all trying to present with between our social media and also like even our podcasts, I mean, you're usually trying to be upbeat. We're not the news. We're not trying to say bleed it leads. So we're not talking about like all the bad things, but I think there has to be a realistic conversation about how in our business we estimate, which is a code word for guessing based on historical data. And then you get into something, you sign a contract, you have to get it done by hook or by crook. There's no out. I mean, I guess there's an out, but that's a whole nother headache. So basically it's better to just get it done. Sometimes the clients are really happy because they stuck one to us. Sometimes it's just across the board. It could be planning, it could be engineering, it could be township. It could be a lot of things that come into play because there's so many moving parts. And, we were just reminiscing about jobs in the past that, at different times, if you took a snapshot of that job, we might have bourbon on the table right now between us.
Yeah, it's one of those things where a phrase comes to mind: "Death makes angels of us all." Like as you think about something in the past, you sort of look at it through a different lens because now you can look at it from a historical standpoint. It's not actively impacting you currently, and that's the way I feel about a lot of the jobs that we're thinking about here. And there's a few of them that you look back, and there's some jobs that you would look back. And if we talked to some of the guys, they would say that was a really great job. I would say it was a great job. Ford would say, you know what, we did a really nice job on that. And it sort of goes by the wayside of what happened to get us there. Whether it was a job where, maybe it pushed us a little beyond our comfort level with manpower or equipment, or maybe it was, that in the bidding, in the estimating, we didn't have enough stuff covered, or maybe it was we encountered something and didn't understand contract terms. There's any
or the
number
client doesn't pay.
Or a client doesn't pay. You know what I mean? It's one of those things. But as you're going through it, it's really stressful, and it puts a lot of pressure on everybody from the guy on the job that knows it, to the foreman running the job that knows what's going on, to the PM, the estimator, all the way up to Ford. You know what I mean? So it impacts us, but then you get through it, and that's a success in itself, that you can look back and you learn from it. And then hopefully you don't make similar mistakes. And at minimum, you're able to go forward with other jobs using that as grounds to say, this is how we're going to propel ourselves through this situation. Yeah.
And it's funny because, we've talked about it plenty of times on the podcast. I'm pretty risk adverse, right? I like calculated risk, but, if I were an estimator, that probably wouldn't win a lot of jobs, right? That's probably fair, right? They'd be well-built bids. Just nobody would want to pay the prices that I'm
well protected.
Yes, well protected.
Very safe.
Yeah. But what's interesting is, we don't necessarily, we know enough to get ourselves in trouble a lot of times, right? That's saying like feels all too true in the world of estimating and heavy civil, because we base a lot of what we know on the information we can gather without going and actually doing the work. Pricing, historical data, the time it normally takes for typical production on things, what environments triggered certain things in the past, and then we go do it, and no job is ever the same. Every time we go do it, it's new places and new people and new challenges and new environmental circumstances
well, it's funny, right, Ford? Because if you talk about the variables that an estimator is trying to account for, right, we're trying to account for what it's going to take production wise,
Mhm.
what it's going to take materials and equipment and personnel, what you're going to encounter, all these things. But if you make it simpler than that, back when I took geometry and there was you built like this T thing and it said like these were your givens, right? And we act like certain things are givens that are not given.
Right.
Like that's what makes estimating so difficult is we say like, okay, uh, you know, a 490 excavator costs X to operate. That's true over the life of every 490. You know what I mean? Like if you took all 490s and you aggregated it, that's what it would cost. And then you can get a little tighter as we've gotten a little bit better with our numbers and say, well, let's talk about our specific 490. And you're like, okay, except what if the 490 hasn't had an undercarriage yet and it needs one, but did we build that in to know that we're going to need one? And at what point do you need it? And how much did fuel cost when you built this? Did you account for the fuel right? And how much idling time is actually built in? Is that right? Like it's actually not a given at all.
Mm.
And we take labor costs and we say, well, we know what the labor cost is. Unless you hit a labor market that completely skews what labor costs, and then you don't know what labor costs are. And you know what materials are, except the quote's not good for anything. It's as good as the paper it's written on. They all have escalation clauses. And to Ford's point, you're tied to a contract you can't change. So you end up in a situation where everything that you thought you knew as a given is not a given. And that's where you started. Like that's before you said like, okay, well, I believe I can put 5 of our guys together on this utility crew and they can put in 300 foot a day. And that was based on a picture of a pipe run going through a field when it turns out there's 13 crossings and now they're going to get 50 foot a day. You know what I mean? And there's nothing the crew can do about it. So it just gets really complicated. And it's one of the things that makes it so hard to do this work is when I was in electrical, you built a frame and I'm aware of how far apart studs are. And if I have an attic or a basement and if I have to drill the studs or if I don't, I know everything before I ever started. The house isn't even built. It's just a picture on a piece of paper, but I can tell you how many feet of wire I'm going to use. I can tell you how many wire nuts you're going to need if you wanted me to. And a lot of the, MEP type estimators, that's what they do. That's why they're good. They know everything down to the last penny. But when it comes to civil, we don't know what's in the ground a lot of times. And then if that's the starting point, if you don't know what you have to move, then how accurate can you be?
Yeah. And you made an interesting point a few minutes ago about contractual language, right? Like if you've got to get to the contract, usually there's a problem already, right? Hopefully if you have to hopefully you don't have to refer back to the contract language for the duration of the project because everything went smooth, got along with the client, work went as expected, etc. But when you do, I think we do a fairly good job of trying to vet the contract language. But again, if it were up to me, there were some contracts we just simply wouldn't accept, but we wouldn't do as much work as we like to do. And we've had times where, maybe our interpretation or our attorney's interpretation of contract language was different than how it's being applied. And that can cause some serious hiccups on the way.
Well, we were just in Vegas for Con Expo, and I was telling someone I was out there, and like, oh, do you gamble? I was like, no, I do not gamble. Just not my thing. I said, we gamble every day. I mean, like literally, probably what we do in heavy civil is as close to, playing unlimited roulette or something like that. Because literally, the contract terms you're saying, you're like, all right, we can take the risk on this one, and we're going to try and roll the dice and see if it's going to work. On the estimate, we're trying to find a better, cheaper way to do something so we can win the bid. So we're like, hey, we might be able to haul this dirt to this other location just because it's cheaper and we're taking that risk, And that's all done before day one, boots on the ground, shovels in the ground.
Yeah.
And then you find the actual conditions and then you have that headache.
Right.
But the interesting thing is that getting through it is really the key. And the team out there just day in, day out, just grinding and getting it done is, sometimes you can make improvements on things. It might start bad and actually turn back better. Sometimes it might be bad and you break, just get through it. But that is heavy civil in a nutshell. And we've all accepted those terms, except for that when you actually have to feel them. It's like, oh yeah, we're risking this. But if you win, you're like, oh, no big deal. And you kind of get a little jaded to it until all of a sudden you have a situation where, you're sweating without any water drops.
Yeah, that's fair. I like to think our odds are a little better than being at the casino.
Check the day.
Some days.
Yeah.
You know what's funny when Ford said that too is I think there is definitely a gambler's nature to this business. You know, I really think so. Even to where when something goes right, when you find a way that you can do something quicker, better, cheaper, you know, whatever it is, you find a material source that's cheaper. You find any number of things. Anybody listening, the guys in the field, they know what we're talking about, even though they don't deal with the money side. A lot of times they know.
You're trying to get that edge.
You're just trying to get that edge. And when you do, it's like you won at gambling. Like in other words, we gambled and said, you know, you took your stack of chips and you said, I think I can do this for $25. And all of a sudden you do it for $20 and you're like, woo, I won. Like that's what just happened, you know? And that's what becomes sort of addictive in this business with owners and estimators and project managers is that challenge. You know what I mean? It's that win. And that lends us to this feeling that we only win when we win, which is the opposite of what we're talking about today.
Right.
What we're talking about today is when you walk in and you know at that moment you are going to lose. Like this is a loss. It's not going to go well. It's not going to go the way you want it to.
Hopefully it didn't happen when we walked in. Right. Hopefully we didn't.
I mean, in other words, that day when you walk into that
No,
situation and you realize at that point, hopefully it's not on day one.
If on day one we're like, well, we lost.
Yeah.
That's,
you know, ironically, there's one specific job I remember that way, that on day one we were like, oh no, you know, Ford and I don't like to get into the specifics of it, but it was with a tough CM, tough construction manager who was going to be a handful. We didn't realize how much at the start. We felt really good about our number until the bid was opened. And then we realized something is wrong because we were significantly less than everybody else, but felt really good about it, which was even more unnerving because we looked at the project and we were like, no, this is a good number for us. And then we got there and by, I don't know, day 5, I think everyone in the company, including like the admins, were on site running equipment. And we were like, we may not have accounted for the impact of how long this would take in liquidated damages, which we didn't get to.
Right.
But it was the threat of that project the whole time was, oh, you don't get done, those liquidated damages are going to kill you. And it ended up being a good project for us. But it was so stressful along the way. I mean, on that project, I remember specifically, I think Tamara was out working on that job at one point. Or Tamara and Aaron, if they didn't work it, it was very close where we considered getting them out.
Tamara's picking trash.
Yeah. So see, Aaron was not able to do it. Tamara and Aaron had different jobs, so Aaron wasn't able to get free. But we had talked about it. Anybody we knew was going to go and help, you know. And now, you know, 8 years later, we're doing a very similar job, and they told me I was going to have to do what we had to do on the first job, and I laughed at the engineer. I was like, we're not doing that. Get the spec book out. We can talk. That's ridiculous. We're not doing that. But we didn't know, you know, and so we did what they asked us to do. And we struggled through and felt really stressed about it and tried to figure out how are we going to make it through this issue and how are we going to get to the end. And by the time we got to the end of it, we felt pretty good about it. And then 2, 3, 10 years removed, we're like, that project was a real success. You know what I mean? So like the change in how it feels versus how it felt, you know, and now we can laugh about it. And there's, you know, I mean, there's all little projects. There was, you know, we mentioned it before we started. We were talking about it, we call it Highway Ed, right? So Ed built a road that had more stone in it than I had in the whole project. And he said, this road will last forever, which it has. It's an amazing road. It's better than the highway that it's tied to. Except I only needed a road to last like 6 weeks.
Yeah,
6 months. You know
6 months.
That road could have fallen apart after 6 months. Now, coincidentally, the owner thrilled and loves us because they've done 4 projects on our one road and never had to redo it. And I mean, Ed was right. It was a great road.
Right.
You know? And I was upset at that point because I was like, this is crazy. But we actually made out okay on that job. And the owner really likes us. You know what I mean? So was it the best decision? Who knows? But you get through and you live and you learn and you just try and be smarter and understand better what we're doing.
Well, I think it goes back to the pride of putting your name on something because, even if the job is going south or did go south and you got to get it done because quitting doesn't work. Like, that's just not how this goes. And so, like, you have to get through the other side because everyone's watching, you know, the client's watching, the banks are watching, whoever else might be in play, then the people driving by are watching. And so getting to the finish line is the first goal, the main goal. Making money so that we can keep investing in the company, that's another goal, but they have to work hand in hand. But there is certain ones in this business where, you know, winning, unfortunately, does not end up in green paper bills. It ends up in everybody's is good. Everybody's paid for, in a qualification. I mean, without talking about it, but so there's a friend of ours, we were in a meeting and he talked about a job that went south on them. And he didn't say how much, but the story he told us, the amount of money that he was risking was so much that like it just had commas after commas on it. I can only imagine. Like he just kind of made this like little like, hey, it would pay for so many people's college, like grandkids and the people in this room's colleges. And so like quick doing the math, you're like, oh, wow. Yeah. And he was just sitting there talking about it because that is the nature of this business in that it is a low margin business. So, I don't know if our odds are much better than at the tables if you actually think about it sometimes, unfortunately. But it is such a thing where
maybe better than a slot machine.
Okay.
Does that make
maybe blackjack or something. Maybe
blackjack. There's some sense to it.
That's okay.
But no, I think that it just needs to be talked about because people getting into the industry, they think that everything is just going to jump in and go to work, especially if they're going to start their own business and they just think it's going to be cash coming out their ears and, new trucks for themselves. And it's just that's not the reality of what we do. And I don't know if I don't know anyone in our industry that hasn't had these challenges, just that, like you said, when something bad happens, the first day it's a headache, 6 weeks later it's a story, and in 6 years it's a funny story type of thing because you made it through the other side, you're still standing, and that's all you can really count for.
You know what really gives me heartburn, so to speak, is when it's contract related. You know what I mean? Is when it's, and we've had a couple lately, and I mean one in particular that, Brian, I'm telling you, and they can record it and you can put this away. We were 100% right, and we would have won if we went to court. And I remember sitting down with you and Ford, and I said, the problem is we're going to win, and we're going to win nothing.
Right.
Like I might be better off just not winning and not even fighting with them just to get some of the money. Mm-hmm. And contractually, we were so right. But had we really, it was some of that contract language that you would remove that would make us, that if we remove it, we won't get the job. But I needed it removed. It was like the one time. There's one GC we've had good luck with, done a few jobs. And that was literally his vice president's line was, well, the contract's never going to matter. And I was like, right. Until it does, like, yeah, I agree. This should never be a problem, except if it is. And if it is, it's a real problem for me.
Yeah, it's a prenup, right? You really got to make sure the prenup's in place because by the time you need to read the prenup, it's not a situation you want to be reading.
Yeah, it's not a situation. No. But I mean, it's one of those things. That's what gives me, going back to my Italian heritage, agita, which means like heartburn. That's what gives me heartburn, is knowing that there's clients out there that we're still going to run into who are not on the up and up, and we're not going to know it until it's too late. And then will we have this one particular job I'm talking about with the contract? Will we be aware enough at that point that when we reach that point the next time, we're going to say, no, we're not making this repair. Mm-hmm. We're going to stand our ground right now because we don't believe that you are going to follow through on your promises down the line. And then we're just going to have spent more money throwing it after, throw good money after bad money. And that would be, if someday that happens, we don't want to have a bad job like that. But if it does, then there's your lesson. Like that was the benefit of the first job, was that you learned the lesson so you didn't do it a second time. Mm-hmm. And that's expensive.
And two things to add to that. One was that wasn't our client that was the problem. It was the client of the client. Yeah. So we don't even get to talk to these people. So trying to figure out who we're working for, how their relationship is with their client, the person that's paying the check. But the second thing is, bringing back up a name from the past, Steve Keach. What did he tell you the one day?
Yeah, it was very early when I met Steve, and he said, someday you're going to lose $250,000, and then you're going to know like the weight that's on you with estimating. Mm. And I thought that was the craziest thing I'm never going to lose $250,000. And we made a $250,000 mistake because someone said, okay. Like, and these things stick with you, like the guys in the field, things happen and it sticks with you. For me, in estimating, project management sticks with me. The guy said, okay. And I remember I said that to 40, we talked about it. And it was like, how could we get here? And I said, Ford, he said, okay. Like I sent an email. I said, this is what I think we should do. This is how we should do it. He said, okay. And so I proceeded the next day and he said nothing. And we worked for 3 months. And then all of a sudden I went to ask him to pay for it. And he said, well, I didn't approve that. And I said, yes, you do. Here's your email. I was so pleased with myself. I do. I had the email. I said, I'm going to do this. You said, okay. He said, okay doesn't say proceed. It says, okay. I didn't I didn't say I'd pay you for it. I was like, I didn't even know what to say. I was like, it was so dishonest of an approach to take. But he was right. He said, okay. He didn't say, I will pay you. He said, okay,
Right.
that solves the problem. And it did, and it cost us $250,000, so it doesn't make me feel good. I'm still aggravated by it. And we haven't worked for them again, and we certainly, they hold a special place with me, but it is one of those things for it. You're going to learn, you're going to get burned. You're not going to be in this business and it all be sunshine and rainbows. It's just, you're not.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I see people and they're like, hey, how did this happen or how did that happen? And it's like, we've talked about it before about some other things about like the, what is winning, and it ties. It's a similar thing where it's just like still being here is a version of winning.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's not the goal of winning, but like sometimes you have to take the small victories, and sometimes the lights being on and you're still doing work is the win, and that's tough because nobody likes to lose, and we've talked about that too. I mean, that's why there's participation trophies and everybody wants to be a winner, but unfortunately that's not every day, and sometimes just getting up the next day and putting your boots on is as much of a win as you're going to get that day.
Right.
Yeah. And I sort of look at it too, when you take like a stock market approach, with the stock market, how it goes up and down, but traditionally, if you stay in long enough, you'll make money because it goes up, but there's going to be major changes. And that's part of that survival, mechanism is if we keep surviving and we keep doing the job, theoretically it grows and it gets bigger and bigger over time, and so, right now the market, we've talked for a while now about we anticipate a downturn at some point. Are we in it? Who knows? Maybe.
Depends which TV channel you watch.
Yeah. I don't know.
Is there more than one?
I don't.
Is there still TV? I'm not even sure.
I don't even know that there's TV anymore. But we go back and forth and you go up and down and you go through all these renditions of yourself. But really the key is just keep moving, just keep waking up, being better tomorrow than you were today. And we're still here. The lights are still on. We're still working. We're still winning work. And that's an accomplishment, and I think, and I think we've talked about this, that I think the impact of COVID is not 100% felt yet in terms of all the money that was flushed into the system, combined with the fact that the average age of a owner in small business America is high. It's over 60. So, there's changes coming, and I still believe we're in the same spot we were, which is we have built a solid company with a lot of good team members, a good infrastructure behind it, solid equipment, a good amount of know-how, and a willingness to go to work. And the work's going to be there, and we just need to keep working. And in 4 or 5 years, I'm sure we're going to have added a few stories that we cringe a little bit, but we'll look back eventually and say like that was a great learning experience. And
it's an expensive learning experience. I mean, it's more expensive than going to college on some of these.
Yeah, well, it's expensive for some people, Ford. So, but it's one of those things that you're not gonna go through this unscathed. You're not gonna do the kind of work we do and have it always go right, as you said, Brian. So, the key is just keep your head up, keep moving, keep doing what you're supposed to do, and we get through. And then X amount of years later, you look back and it's a funny story about a job, and it's. I was out today and literally was talking about the highway Ed. That's what made it come to my mind. I was talking with Justin about it.
Yeah.
Because Ed's still Ed. He's amazing, but he's Ed.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, no, I think you captured the moral of what we're trying to get to is that, it's not always rosy, but it's also your perspective of how you look at things. Like, yeah, tough day, but you got to look a little bit more long term. It's unfortunately, it can't be a snapshot of anything. It's got to be the long look to make it worthwhile.
Yeah, for sure. That's probably a good place to wrap it up. So thanks for joining us today, folks. We hope you got something out of this, and we look forward to having you on another episode.